Mayer Rothschild was born in 1744 in Frankfurt, Germany, in a ghetto known as Jew Alley. The living conditions were difficult, but it was there that the young Rothschild began to learn about business. His father was a silk merchant and would exchange foreign currency. Later, he learned about rare coins from the Roman and Byzantine empires. The persons most interested in these rare coins were princes and other nobles. Because of Rothschild's large collection of rare coins, Mayer attracted the attention of the crowned prince Wilhelm of Hesse. The prince grew to trust Mayer in all matters of investing and finance. When Prince Wilhelm Hesse came into power, he inherited one of the largest fortunes in Europe. Wilhelm trusted the Rothschild to be his Hofjude, German for court Jew, which meant Mayer Rothschild was in a position to manage and protect Wilhelm's properties, wealth, and tax collection. This position was put to the test when Napoleon invaded Germany. Mayer Rothschild had seen this coming. Some years earlier, he had sent his son to London to begin a finance business similar to his business in Germany. He then moved the royal funds to London. He lent those funds to the British for the war effort against Napoleon, making a fortune in the effort. Before Mayer Rothschild's death, he sent his sons to live in strategic cities throughout Europe, linking 5 Rothschild banking branches. In the 19th century, the Rothschilds made their massive fortune by playing both sides of wars and lending to governments. Mystery surrounds the Rothschild family, their wealth, their business practices, and their current holdings. Mayer is famous for his quote, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." What we do know is that the Rothschilds excelled where Christians have not. Why is it that Christians in the last 150 years have excelled at being conquered? Why is it that once proud Christian institutions like denominations, hospitals, universities, and countries are now in the hands of pagans? Why did the Christians hand these institutions over without a fight? Jesus said in a parable, "The sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light." Never has Jesus' parable been more true than in our time. Not only have Christians failed to preserve and pass on cities and states that were founded by Christians, but Christians of our time fail to pass on their personal wealth, money, and space to their generations. They steal the inheritance of their generations and leave their grandchildren nothing. We must correct this mistake. The building of new Christendom depends on men loving their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren by thinking like a Christian about wealth, money, and space, and not thinking like a modern consumer. We, by the grace of God, will build, fight, and win. The King's Hall podcast exists to make self-ruled men who rule well and win the world.
Welcome back to the King's Hall podcast. My name's Brian Sauvé, joined here with my good friends, Daniel, what is it, Berkowitz? What did you say on the After Hours last week?
Berkowitz.
Berkowitz. Right. Berkowitz Bunkholder and Eric Kahn.
That's right.
How you doing, gentlemen?
Why did you mispronounce his name?
Because I'm the fraud king of Kentucky. Speaking of money.
Yeah, if you ever want to have a good time, just Google Eric Kahn. I'm not going to explain anymore. Well, welcome back, everybody, to this episode here. We're taking up one of the most important subjects, in my opinion at least, on this season of the King's Hall. This is an area where you cannot accomplish the aim of this season, which is what? The new Christendom. You can't accomplish that aim if you get this wrong. I think you can say it that plainly. And it's the issue of wealth, money, and space. Wealth, money, and space. If you don't understand this, if you fall into the ditch on either side of the road when it comes to wealth, money, and space, then you will not create the kind of Christians, the kind of families, the kind of churches, the kind of nations that will be able to maintain a robustly Christian society, robustly Christian culture over the long haul. And so we're going to be talking about this issue in really three fairly simple parts in the episode today. The first is simply establishing that Christians have struggled to think rightly about wealth, money, and space. We're going to talk about what it looks like when you don't get this right, why people aren't getting this right, what kind of theological errors are leading to wrong thinking and wrong praxis even, surrounding this issue of wealth, money, and space. That's part one. Part two, and when I say part one, I know I'm talking, and so you might assume this is going to be like a 12-part series, but this is one episode. The second part of this episode, we're going to talk about why this failure of theology has made Christians who are very good at getting conquered. This is the result if you get this wrong. At least in one of the directions you can get it wrong. And then number three, we're going to talk about how you can think and act rightly on this subject and really try to get pretty practical. We'll talk about principles, we'll talk high level, but really we want this to be helpful in thinking through, right now, you as a man listening to this show, how can you take away some principles and some actionable items to do better in this area and set up your generations, your church, your community for success, for fruitfulness when it comes to wealth, money, and space. Just practically, what should you do? How can you change things? Maybe your family left you nothing. Maybe they left you debt and bad examples. Maybe your parents are, they had their government job but they're planning on leaving you exactly $0 as they coast through their retirement until the last month of their life when the nursing home pulls the last, dollar out of their 401k and then leaves you with no inheritance. How can you be thinking better about this than maybe you received? Sound good?
Sounds great.
Yep.
So Dan, maybe we should start with just understanding, what do we even mean when we're talking? I've used this phrase several times: wealth, money, and space. What does that even mean? What are we talking about?
Yeah, because there's a lot of crossovers, right? A wealthy person has money and space. Typically, they also have assets. Generally speaking, I think of a wealthy person as being able to cover their expenses on non-salaried income. So not from your job, just from all of the other sources of income that you have. The average wealthy person has 7 sources of income, I believe.
Wow.
And so some people call that passive income, which is kind of silly because it makes it sound like it's really easy to get. But it all takes work.
It's just passive.
It's just passive.
So
it's
just basically
it's
wait.
Passive income.
See, because I always think of a wealthy person as someone who fills up their gas tank and doesn't care.
All the way.
All the way to the top.
Yeah. What are the signs of being rich? It's really funny because growing up, the people that you think of being rich, I thought people that had Nickelodeon were loaded because we had antennas on our TV. And come to find out, actually people that had cable back then were not wealthy. They were actually poor because they put their money into cable.
And dumber over time.
And dumber. Dumber. No, so wealth, that's just one way I think of it, is being able to cover your expenses through non-salaried income. Yeah. So with all of your other sources of income that you have. The other thing is that I think of assets. Assets are one of the things that wealthy people have that poor people do not have. They have a lot of assets. And that becomes really important when you know that we're in an inflationary economy, because assets go up in value with inflation. And so it is a hedge. It's the best savings account you can have in an inflationary economy.
What would be an example, Dan, of assets? I mean, besides my gold grill in my mouth, besides that.
Yeah, so one of the most obvious assets are like rental properties, commercial and residential. But like a single family rental home is an asset that you are renting. You are getting rental income from. It's also appreciating in value with inflation.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other thing is like businesses. So owning businesses, owning stocks, bonds, especially like dividend bearing stocks, which I'm just going to let you know, those are way too boring for me at this point. But that would be if you had a ton of money and you had a bunch of dividends that were paid out 7%. By the way, dividends are not taxed up to $80,000 a year. So tax-free money. Get to an accountant, though, or a tax accountant, to make sure that that's actually true. I don't have that much income in dividends. And the other thing I would put in that bucket would be skills. I think a very skilled man is a wealthy man. He might not have tapped it in the traditional sense to say like, oh, that dude's rich.
Yeah.
But those people that have honed skills, I think, are wealthy in a different way. When we talk about money, just simply, I would just say buying power, the ability to buy.
Yeah. And people, this is counterintuitive, I think, in an inflationary world. People think, why would you want money? And that sounds dumb because you're like, well, aren't we talking about wealth and space? Some people say like you should hold $0 at all times because of inflation. It's actually a mistake because money is optionality. Liquid cash.
Right. What does that mean? What does optionality mean?
Optionality means that I can react to different conditions in the market. If I have cash and there's a 40% downturn, I can go buy things for 40%.
You have the option to buy things.
Yeah, I have an option.
Yeah.
If all of my money is tied up in illiquid assets, which are worth money, but they're hard to convert into money, or they're slow to convert into money, or they're even prone to moving with the market. So if the market turns way down, my illiquid assets turn down too, and it's difficult for me to sell them quickly enough in many cases.
So money helps you react quickly to changing market conditions, among other things.
Yeah, having cash flow and also having money in hand. For example, a church is a good example of an organization that really, we're going to talk about this, but benefits from having cash on hand so they can respond to difficulties, hardship, that sort of thing. So yeah, people might think, money, but inflation, fiat's bad. Look, we get it. But optionality is one of the most powerful things that you have to understand if you want to do well in this area.
Yeah, so I would say money is buying power. So it can be cash, it can be fiat, it could be other things too. Mm-hmm. Space would be just physical lands and buildings, even intellectual property you could probably put in there to some degree or another, but I would definitely stick with more the way that we're going to treat this as physical land and buildings. Being space, you are buying space essentially, or owning space. Yeah. So those are the categories that we're going to be talking about: wealth, money, and space. Yeah, and those are kind of what they mean. What we're going to be talking about today as we define them.
Yeah. So the first point that we wanted to take up was just talking through why and how Christians have struggled to think rightly about wealth, money, and space, because this has been a common, a difficult thing to get right on a theological level, to where people have been taught to think wrongly about wealth, money, and space. And that's led to, if you believe the wrong thing about something, you will not treat the thing rightly. Like obviously, if you thought that the goal for something like sex was promiscuity, like the Christless manosphere, if you were like, oh yeah, the sex is about how many women can I bed, right? So I'm going to take pickup artistry classes and really succeed in the world of sex. Well, you've actually failed because you've set the wrong target. You're aiming for the wrong thing. You're actually aiming for failure. You are trying as hard as you can to fail. And unfortunately, there have been many theological emphasis or different and creative ways that Christians have gotten this issue of wealth, money, and space wrong. And I mean both now and in the historic church.
Yeah, that's right.
And I would say in the last, say, like 150 years, part of the biggest problem is that you just have to be aware of when you're talking about, again, money, space, wealth. It has been colored heavily by Marxism. So I was even posting the other day, I said, listen, I grew up in the Young, Restless, and Reformed, and it was don't waste your life, which translated to like, don't own property, get rid of it, do missions overseas, be poor, love the fact that like, Jesus, you don't have a house. And really what happened was the Marxists took that and they were like, yeah, so when Bill Gates says you'll own nothing and be happy, you're like Jesus.
Ooh.
And so you fall into this ditch of like all property. I've had people on Twitter tell me, property ownership is unchristian, which is interesting because if you look at things like Westminster Confession and what they wrote about theft, the flip side of theft is you're protecting property rights.
Yes.
So God obviously believes in ownership of things.
It's the presupposition under that law.
For that commandment.
Is that it's lawful to own things.
And then there's I think actually a much smaller ditch, but it does happen in Christian camps, which is health, wealth, and prosperity. So there definitely are crazy Kenneth Copeland people who are saying, pray to God and he'll give you the Cadillac. God wants you to be wealthy, Joel Osteen, people like this. And they are very influential in America. So I think when you stack those two things up, a lot of people in between will say, well, at best, I should sort of detest wealth, not really want it, and not really think too much about, like, building wealth, multi-generational homes. And Dan, I think especially, that's turned most American Christians into consumers. And consumers are not people, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not people that think about assets in particular.
For the project of this season to be successful, the project of seeing a new Christendom built, there will need to be thousands and thousands of Christian men and women who are equipped to stand for the truth of Scripture against the errors of both the liberal church and the pagan culture. This is one reason we're so glad to be partnering with our sponsor for this season, Reformation Heritage Books. Reformation Heritage Books offers a large selection of helpful and theologically rigorous resources on everything from biblical theology to history to blue-collar family discipleship, the type of library and resources that could make the kind of men and women I just described, grounded in the rich heritage of the Reformed faith. We'd like to highlight one resource in particular, their Family Worship Bible Guide, that presents rich devotional thoughts on all 1,189 chapters of the Bible, including searching questions to promote conversation and to help you in leading your family in such a way as to say with Joshua, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Tap the link in the description of this episode to pick one up today.
Yeah, they're not going to think about assets. The thing is, it's really interesting that you mentioned Christians turning into consumers, because it's just falling from one ditch into another.
Yes.
And so, and to show like a little bit of grace, you do have passages like in 1 Timothy.
Yeah.
Paul says that money is the root of all evil.
The love of money. Yeah.
The love of money is the root of all evil. Excuse me.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And so, but
1 Timothy
my
6:10.
translation is what people hear is that money is the root of all evil.
Good point. He says those who want to be rich fall into a snare. Essentially, this is 1 Timothy 6, and he says it plunges them into ruin and destruction, for the love of money is the root of all. And literally in Greek, like in a lot of English translations, it will say the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It just literally says the love of money is the root of all evil. By craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs and sorrows. So, there's something in this idolatry of money that is a shared root with all sin. It has this common root. There's some thing that the human heart is doing, the fallen human heart is doing in sinfully loving money that is the same impulse leading him to sin in every other way that he sins. And I think that that's actually, understanding what that is and how that works is one of the most it's very interesting, because when you think about what money is basically, you can turn it into anything. So money, in a sense, represents all human pleasure, security. Money is your shield and your reward. Money is your strong tower. Money is your banner. Money can, you can turn it into Teslas or vacations or
money answers
sex.
everything.
Money seems to do what only
Proverbs.
God can do.
Yeah.
So money, the love of money is like a concentrated form of idolatry, I think is the point of that verse.
Yeah. When you preached a sermon on that in Proverbs,
Yeah.
that was one of the most helpful sermons that I had ever heard, because that verse, I had been taught just along with, I'm sure everybody else, this pietistic notion that money is evil, just is absolutely evil.
Yep.
You should despise it, and the best thing to do would be to give it all away.
Yeah, just get rid of it.
Yeah, to get rid of it all, to Francis chant it and just sell everything and go to Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, on missions. No, seriously,
we
that's what he
naming
did.
names. We naming names. No, he literally did that. Yeah.
Yeah, he literally did that. So that's how I had always had this idea of money. Like, I have money in my bank account and I give some of it to the church, but I feel dirty because I still have some and I work for it. And it's almost like everything that I did in gaining income and providing for my family was tainted with evil mammon that was coming into my bank account.
And I think this is one of the rubs that I've talked about in the Hard Men podcast, but why men are flocking away from the American church in droves is because it's basically like, hey, come give us your money for missions and for my salary, but also everything you do is dirty and unholy.
Yeah.
And so we need your money on the one hand, and it's bad unless you're giving it to us for missions or your tithe or whatever. And so I think a lot of American men have said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
Hang on.
And I think what we need
Seem
to
be getting played.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we need to recover is, pastors ought to be telling their men, hey, yeah, go righteously make a lot of money and find different ways to invest it in the kingdom. And here's what I think a lot of people will miss. A tithe is part of the investment in the kingdom, but so might be starting a media company. So might be starting a business that can be run and can profit people by, say, like truth-telling, right? It doesn't all have to be missions and tithe.
Yeah, so maybe I actually like that. It's almost like, you know how some people, the way that they taught about something like sex. Again, sex is a good one to help us understand money because I think it helps us to see how the idolatry of money is working in a way that is more intuitive to us. Like, people have wrongly taught things like, sex is dirty and gross, so save it for the one you love. They've done the same thing with money. They're like, money is evil and bad, so give it all to us, says the church. They're like, there's some kind of error. And I think to focus us in on this first question here, that the errors really run in two directions. There's a ditch on one side of the road that is like an ascetical ditch. And there's a ditch on the other side of the road that you mentioned that's like the prosperity theology ditch. So let's talk through those two, starting with the ascetic ditch. We've circled around it. Where do we see this? What does it look like, and how does it get wealth, money, and space wrong, this ascetical ditch?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that Eric brought up Marxism, because you can see how that fits so well with the ascetic teachings of the church, because we automatically have suspicions of wealthy people, don't we? Mm-hmm. I mean, you just expect that if somebody has wealth, that they've received that wealth through unjust gains.
Yeah, they must have stolen it from someone. They've
stolen it from someone, or they've used people in order to get that, or taken advantage of people to get those things. And so you can see how that then the idea that, well, I don't have a lot of that, so then therefore I am more righteous, would be some sort of pietistic, warm, fuzzy feeling that you'd get by being able to justify why you actually suck at making money. But the ascetics, they essentially, when we say that, we're saying people that historically through different movements have denied pleasure in some form or another. So you see this a lot. You mentioned sex, like they would abstain from sex, even as far as like foods that tasted good. They would eat dried foods or paste, essentially. And they would take vows of poverty, things like that. And so you can see how some teachings in the pietistic movement would definitely emphasize not having things and not taking pleasure in the things of the world and denying the things of the world in this specific way would be righteous.
Well, I was even thinking, as you were talking about that, C.S. Lewis, so he made a lot of money off the Narnia books, but in his biography, we're told that he gave away like 100% of the profits. And so when he died, what he left to his kid was like a jacket, a pair of slacks, and like $32.
Wow.
But that was, in the book at least, it was kind of portrayed as like, that's the really Christian thing to do, is die with nothing and pass on nothing. Well, the problem is then you read the Proverbs and it's like, well, actually the godly thing to do is leave an inheritance to your children. We're explicitly told that.
Yeah.
So again, it plays into that ascetic, sort of like a monk, we should all die with nothing, having never tasted pleasure, and we should buy into the Puritan notion that somewhere someone is enjoying themselves, the nagging suspicion that someone is doing that.
Yeah. So I mean, in the same way that the ascetic is making an error where it's like, just like God did not give the good gift of sex for the sake of these ruinous pursuits of pornography, fornication, adultery, but to bless his people with fruitfulness, pleasure, joy, children, those gifts. He doesn't give people money for the sake, and money, like when you say money, like, well, God didn't give money direct. God made a world that was full of wealth. I mean, the garden was full of gold. God intended for it to be used as money, like from the beginning. He didn't give his people money for the sake of the ruinous pursuits of self-sufficiency, idolatry, greed, materialism, but he gave those good gifts so that people could enjoy his creation, love their neighbors, build communities that would preach about this radically generous Father who made all things, who blesses his people, and at whose right hand are pleasures forevermore. So the ascetic gets it wrong by actually ending up maligning God's character as a good father in saying all of these good things you've made that wealth basically represents, those are actually bad things. When you said very good over the whole creation, Father, you were wrong. These are dangerous things. And it's like, they're dangerous to the sinner, but they are actually powerful to the righteous, which is why, I mean, asceticism cannot stand up to the whole of Scripture. You have verses like Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of Yahweh makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. Meaning that if you find sorrow along with wealth, human beings are the ones who brought all of that sorrow to the equation. God added no sorrow to it. In fact, when God blesses in a normative way, generally speaking, and you, again, read the covenant blessings in the book of Deuteronomy, read the Proverbs, you'll see that one of the side effects of God blessing his people as they live at peace with the world he made and the laws that he made by grace and through faith is that they actually tend to gain wealth, money, and space. These are just actually good, natural, not even natural, but side effects that God built in to the thing.
You can even see that through the patriarchs.
Yes, absolutely.
Part of God's blessing was wealth.
Yeah.
I mean, just reading through Genesis to my boys, and it's just astounding how much wealth that these guys had.
Yeah.
You know, when it was Jacob and he was trying to appease Esau, and as a gift, he was giving just amazing amounts of livestock to this guy. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm close enough to the farming world and the farming community that I know that each of these animals is a rather substantial dollar amount. And in total, money. It's unbelievable. Yes. And that was just a gift out of his excess, essentially. Yes. And so this even comes along with God's blessings.
Yeah, you see a guy, it's funny that we record this episode today because it's August 2nd, 2022, year of our Lord, as we record this. And a guy by the name of Ronald Sider died just like 4 or 5 days ago. He died on July 27th. And Ronald Sider was essentially what you might call like a Christian Marxist or a Christian socialist. Or he wrote some very popular books in the late 20th century on Christianity and wealth and things like this that were very much socialistic, very much aiming for that kind of thing. Evangelicals for Social Action was a think tank that he founded. And I'm very thankful to Mr. Sider because he actually his work led to the writing of one of my favorite books, a book that you should read on this subject by David Chilton, entitled Productive Christians in an Age of Guilt Manipulators. This is a book that would take the topic of this episode and expand it to like a glorious proportions. You should all read it if you haven't already. And Chilton wrote that book in response to Sider. I think you read that and Joe Rigney's The Things of Earth, and you'll get two great correctives to both of these ditches, to the ditch of the ascetic who essentially maligns God's goodness and saying that the gift itself is bad. It's bad and we should avoid it. That the answer to wealth is the avoidance of the thing, just like some of the early church fathers got sex wrong by saying or implying that the answer to sexual sin was to avoid sex or put enormous shackles beyond what God had put in his goodness on his law around sex. They said we need 50 other laws. We need to restrict sex now to only for procreation. And it's only on this time, you can't do it on this feast day. You can't have sex on the Sabbath. You can't do, all these different sorts of things. The ascetic wants to do the same with money. He says the answer is to avoid it.
Yeah, you see this actually to even push a hot button a little bit more. You see this pietistic, ascetic sort of instinct also in alcohol today.
Absolutely.
Because the Psalms say that God gave wine to gladden the hearts of men. That's in the Bible. It says that.
Yes.
And so in fear of committing the sin of drunkenness, we've put up barriers around in teetotaling, purity movements that would prevent you from consuming alcohol at all. Saying, no, actually, God, your gift of wine is not a gift, it's a curse.
When I drink it, it makes me happy. And so it's like, I feel I should probably not do this thing. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, that's what he made it to do. It's supposed to make you feel kind of cheerful.
It's a design feature.
So, have a glass of wine with dinner and be cheerful. You see this we've talked a lot about in this season about pietism. We've talked a lot about dispensationalism, which again, if you think that the Great Tribulation and the secret rapture of the church and the calamitous end of the world is going to end, like if you really thought the world was going to end in 1988, then why would you spend all this time building something like a Christian school that requires wealth, money, and space? Why would you build a Christian business? Like, there'd be no point. So you see how some of these errors work together to create the ascetic impulse.
Yeah, and I think so. That's really the ascetic impulse.
Yeah,
which is one ditch. And Eric, you'd mentioned the other ditch, which would be the prosperity gospel, right? And so that's like the name it, claim it, give me the stuff, right? And so that's the other ditch. Could you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I would even connect that, Dan, you're absolutely right, to something like Job's friends. Well, if you've been righteous, then you wouldn't have lost everything, which included his wealth, his health, any form of human prosperity. In that case, obviously, we know, hindsight being 20/20, thanks to the book of Job, he was righteous. God said that he was. So one of the things that we look to is how covenant promises work and how they are generally true, but that does not mean that righteous people won't suffer. Obviously, those things happen. What prosperity teaching will generally say, and it comes from a few different camps, is that if you trust God, you'll be rich. And it simplifies everything pretty much to that. You'll be rich and healthy, and if you die, it's because, you die poor, it's because you didn't have enough faith. So it's an oversimplification of really proverbial wisdom and a misapplication, which, Brian, like R2K people have actually kind of picked this up and gone a totally different way with it. But there is a truth here that we have to say. That's, prosperity preaching is wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Prosperity preaching is wrong because what it does is it misunderstands, instead of having a good father who gives good gifts, and that there being a normative pattern to those good gifts, like that you see in the Proverbs, things like whoever is diligent, whoever works diligently will receive, receive wealth, basically. I'm trying to find this. Oh yeah, here we go. Proverbs 10:4. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So there's the principle. All right, so you understand that principle. God made a world where a slack hand causes poverty, but if you work diligently, it tends to result in wealth. Where God is a good father, he loves to bless his people, and as his people follow him and obey his laws and his rules and live at peace with reality, that it tends to result in blessing that even has a monetary side to it. Literally, like if you obey God's law, he delights to actually give money to you. Like that's there. Even things like generosity in Scripture, Jesus says, give and it will be given back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over will be put into your bosom. With the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. So it's like there are those principles there. The prosperity gospelist, what they do is, instead of a good father who gives good gifts, so that even when we obey him and are at peace with him, and then we get suffering, faith looks at that suffering and says, this is better. This is the best gift that God could have given me right now. Okay, the prosperity gospelist can't say that because he's made faith into an instrumental sort of, to use Mark Driscoll's phrase, a stick, and he's made God into a piñata. And if you whack the piñata of God with the stick of faith, then good things fall out. So it's a manipulative. It's like the pagans who said, if I sacrifice enough blood, the sun will come up kind of view. Whereas a Christian understands the general pattern and is preserved from those errors. The prosperity gospelist ends up making the gifts into the God, and God just the means to get their real God, right, with the stick of faith. And so everything's just flattened out. You would then all of a sudden look at people who are ill and say, well, you didn't have enough faith. People who are poor didn't have enough faith. But of course, the Scriptures have righteous poor people, righteous rich people, unrighteous rich people, and unrighteous poor people. There's all four categories represented. And so wealth itself is not this univariate equation by which you can measure the righteousness of a person. You just can't. It doesn't work like that. The world is more complex than that because God's providential plan is more complex than that. What God is doing is much more intricate than that one-to-one sort of math. God is doing calculus, and prosperity gospelists make him, do simple addition poorly.
And I think it's a really good point, Brian, because when we're talking about we have to deal with with wealth in wisdom. Okay, that means that you're going to have to do some calculus.
Yeah.
Right? We can't just have simplistic platitudes that we fall back on.
Right.
We're actually going to have to think through these issues pretty carefully.
Yes. Jesus was poor and righteous. Jesus is not poor now. Like some people make this mistake where they're like, yeah, we got to be poor like Jesus. I'm like, right now?
Somebody actually said that to me. They're like,
he's not poor right now.
Jesus owns nothing. And I just responded. I said, Jesus owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Literally, he owns
everything.
All of it. You included, by the way.
All kingdoms.
He's Daniel 7, 13, and 14 has happened. He's been presented before the Ancient of Days, and he has received a kingdom which is everlasting and whose dominion will have no limitation. I mean, so it's obviously too simple to try and veer into either of these ditches, and you will end up with errors. I think that, Dan, you had talked about before we recorded this episode and had even kind of written some notes here on some points that I think have also, illustrated one of the ways that we get this wrong. And it really starts to bring us into our second point here, that this failure of theology has made Christians who are very good at getting conquered. One of the ways, for example, that we've seen this, and maybe you could speak to it more, is just, we've learned, and we've just kind of in a docile way gone along with sending our women to work to go and have 2-income households. All of our women are working. In one way, that's actually chasing wealth in a sinful way. It's fundamentally part of it is getting this issue wrong. So, maybe we could talk about that a little bit as we move into this Christians are very good at getting conquered section.
Yeah, I think that's let me back up for a moment. Okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what I really think we should frame that part of the conversation with, women going back to work, is due to the teaching of the church, especially towards men that show up, there's not as many men in churches. Yeah. Is that ambition is actually also dirty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, ambition is something that men should not have. You should be meek, and you should be lowly.
Yeah.
Like you said, like Jesus. But the way that they've pictured Jesus is more like the really, pastel painting, holding a lamb sort of Jesus, instead of the world-conquering king that, like we said, owns cattle on 1,000 hills.
Well, and that's the reality, too, just to interject, that if you're going to be a successful business owner, I think this is where the rub is with the church, too. You got to kind of be a brave man. You got to be a risk taker. You're going to be the kind of man, if you're really good at, like, say, owning property, running businesses, being successful in the economy, it won't sit well with a lot of the priest-type people because they'll look at you and they say, well, you're like David out on the field shedding blood, and I'm in here in holy places offering sweet, fragrant prayers. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, we've lost actually manly pastorates because pastors are also conquering spiritually. They're leading their people into spiritual warfare every week, all those things, church militant. But I think what a lot of this to me comes down to is the guys who are falling the pietism trap. Wealth is bad. I don't go after it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's get down to brass tacks. These are lazy guys who don't want to spill blood on the field. And like building a business.
Yeah.
I've done startups. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, they don't want to take risk.
It is so weighty, and you're like, I could pour a couple of years of my life into this thing, and it might fail.
Yep.
And so a lot of guys are like, Jesus wants me to watch Netflix and spend every spare moment doing so while being calm and nice. Meanwhile, if you're doing a startup, if you're running all these businesses, chances are you might lose your temper a time or two.
Yeah, and I think part of it, you have to look at the state of the church, the shepherds of the church, the pastors.
Yeah.
Ambition in a pastor can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing, right? Yeah, ambition is transient. It just depends. What are you ambitious for?
What's it aimed at?
What's it aimed at? But because we don't have the theological grounding to have good ambition ends up looking like the seeker-sensitive megachurches, multi-churches, franchise model churches, essentially just taking the corporate world, bringing it into the church because that's the only way that they know how to be ambitious, and then they just multiply and make themselves like some Warren Buffett-esque CEO type figure.
That's really what Willow Creek was. Bill Hybels would always talk about how I could cut it as a CEO anywhere. Like, that was really important to him. But I also think of books like Dave Harvey, when he was still Sovereign Grace at this point, but he wrote a book called Ambition. I think the book was overall pretty good. But one of the things that made me think of is, like, we have to really wring our hands to say, like, is it okay to be ambitious?
Yeah.
Like, you have to do all this, like, cheese grater on your soul to get an answer that, and the bottom line is, like, I feel comfortable saying to my kids, go get them.
Yeah. One of my pastoral goals, I've actually said this from the pulpit. It's been a minute. I need to say it again. One of my pastoral goals is to inflame in the men a desire and a passion for glory.
Yes.
Where they would understand rightly what glory is and what it's for.
It's not just their self-glorification.
The glory of a thing is that thing when it is at peace with what God has made it to be and do. So a man is glorious when he is for Christ's crown and kingdom, loving his wife, raising children, loving his neighbor economically, which looks like expanding the economic pie.
Doing excellent work
that will cause them to stand before kings, being a courageous risk taker for the right things, being wise as serpent, innocent as a dove. When a man has range like that, and then he applies those gifts which God has given him in a way where he's not just saying, but anyone could look at his life and say, that guy's trying to take 2 talents that God gave him and return 10 to his king. That's what he's trying to do. And that man will win glory. He won't win the false glory that comes from men. That's not what he's aiming for. But he might win proper honor from other men. He might win respect of other men. But he's ultimately not aiming to build his own kingdom. He's aiming to build God's kingdom. But sometimes people think they mistake hard, masculine, risk-taking, courageous vocational work, and they mistake it for Babel building categorically, like where all of that is necessarily Babel building. It's like, no, it's not. We should want to raise our sons not to be lazy, worthless blobs of grown men who are like, well, at least I never accomplished something and risked being proud.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because I remember, like, my teenage years being in church, we would always hear things about, like, hey, don't be a workaholic. Stop thinking your career is everything.
Yeah.
Almost never were you like, dude, get off your mom's basement couch, stop watching Marvel movies, and go do something.
Yeah, your family's really struggling because you're making $26,000 a year and you want to have
Work
5
harder.
kids and have your wife stay at home, and you're telling your wife her grocery budget is $217 a month to feed 5 kids. Dude, you're denying the faith. You need to go make more money. Like, and I know there are situations, people always throw the asterisk.
exception.
They'll be like, what about the guy who lost both feet in an accident at the mill and one of his eyes got poked out, when he was getting the mail for his wife when she was pregnant. And then after that, he got a traumatic brain injury.
Always.
And he was, an idiot. And so you're being a legalist. I'm like, no. Paul says a man who doesn't provide for his family has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So therefore, provide for your family. He's talking about money, guys. Like, he's actually talking about feeding people.
Yeah, so I will say, just as a preface to that,
Sure.
I will give an asterisk, because in the world we live in, you have to be aware of the world we live in.
Yes.
And your salaried income, you take home 50%.
Right.
Of what you actually earn.
At the end, when you actually factor in property taxes, gas taxes, food taxes.
Yeah, your cell
all
phone
the
taxes, like all the taxes,
Yeah,
just the breathing tax. You take home very little. So the government is making it
stealing.
very, very difficult for you to exist and to support your family,
Absolutely.
especially on one income.
Yeah.
But that's not an excuse.
No, it's an explanation.
That's an explanation. It's just knowing that information actually should make you able to succeed.
So, that's thorns and thistles. You live in a cursed world.
Yeah.
A cursed world isn't just that the ground will bring forth weeds. It's also that people will be weeds. So you'll have to deal with cursed, sinful people. So Paul wouldn't look at, like, for example, a family being carried off into captivity in Babylon by the invading empire when they were, a faithful covenant member, and say, Why aren't you providing for your family? You're worse than an unbeliever. I'm not saying that. And that is a good, again.
No, I know
King's Hall
that's not what you're saying.
nuance.
It doesn't mean, though, it doesn't absolve you of a responsibility. That's just an excuse.
It doesn't.
But it's reality. And so you need to have that information in mind and use ambition to say, okay, now that I know this, there are tax codes. Why do the wealthy people not pay taxes? Why, when Mitt Romney was running for president, did he only pay 13% in taxes? Why didn't Trump want to disclose his tax statements? It's because they don't pay taxes, because they know how to work the system.
Yeah.
And so knowing that, you should be able to figure that out, which is one of our applications later, but you should be able to game the system and be like, as you know, crafty.
It's like, you know, someone says, hey, you know, to get into this unit in the military, this combat unit you want to join, you got to be able to run a 6-minute mile. And you're like, okay, great. Train, I can do my 6-minute mile. And then they say, oh, you show up to run the mile for the test. Like, oh, with a 40-pound weight vest on. Oh, okay, that's another factor. You're running the 6-minute mile with a 50% weight belt on, to mix my metaphors here. You just are, because you're being robbed in a way that is 5 times worse, literally, I mean, than the tyrannical situation that God warned them about when he said, your kings will demand a tithe of your money, a 10% tax if you have the kings like the nation surrounding you. And now we're like 5x that with 50% in taxes.
Is this where we get to talk about the people and the usury and the... I'll leave that one out.
Maybe that'll be after hours. No, what we were talking about was women and work.
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad you guys brought this up, because this is a theological error that has led. Effeminacy in men is a theological error, as well as just training men to not have ambition.
It's a trained thing. It's a virtue.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was going to say, you know, bringing this all around. I think what we really have to get at is that pastors and churches need to, number one, understand what men are facing. So, like, understanding inflation. Understanding what you're saying to men when you're saying, hey, you got to be a sole breadwinner so mom can come home. What are some actual ways you can make that happen? Because, you know, maybe working entry-level retail is not going to get that done.
Right.
But when we say to our men, and you have to, pastorally, when you say to your men, you need to make more money, I think it would be another thing to be able to point them in the right directions with small business owners and resources to say, look, if you're faithful in a small thing, we can train you, we can teach you, we can help you, we can assist you so that you can get to a place where you're making more money. And I think this is where a lot of men get discouraged, is because a lot of pastors, they don't understand what men are facing.
Right.
And then they just say, well, you know, as long as you have a really good devotional time in the morning, though.
Oh, yeah.
But we do have to actually deal with inflation. You're going to have to. And here's what I've realized, too, is my life has progressed, and I've spent more time around millionaire, billionaire types. I've realized they're in that position, and they think differently about life, and they're able to build wealth. So, like, right now, there are millionaires who are not even concerned about the inflation so much as they're like, you know, I've had several of them tell me, like, look, God is doing a great work. Like, we need to see where he's moving and invest our resources and build.
Yeah.
Which to me was crazy, because it's like, wait, you're not crying about gas. Wait, you're not.
You're right.
So I think a lot of this, too, is about training men with the right mindset. This is not the time to retreat. This is the time to say, what can we be building to create and generate wealth?
Yeah, in times of fear, it's especially important to be courageous and bold.
Yes.
And so the wealthy see these things that would scare us, like gas prices going up or inflation happening.
Opportunities.
Opportunity. Yeah. Exactly. That's information.
People got wealthy during the Depression.
Absolutely.
They built their wealth through the Depression.
Well, the rich get rich during recessions.
Yes.
That's right. Is the old trope. So one of the things with this effeminate, you know, teaching that we've had in the church.
Are you talking about the Fed?
And when we say federal, we don't mean like federal theology, like covenant theology. We mean people who have appointed themselves the federal head of humanity and rob all of us by debasing the currency. That's what we're talking about.
So getting back to my main point, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Was that what is the idealized job then for these pastors? You know, that are training your men. What is the ideal job? And we live around Hill Air Force Base, and
the military-industrial complex that supports it.
That's correct. And so the ideal job is to work for the government or for a government contractor, because you have almost no risk there.
Cast iron benefits. Very difficult to get fired.
You don't even actually have to work.
Yeah, you have a benefits package that's worth conservatively in today's day $40,000 or $60,000 a lot of the time. By the time you actually add it up, if you were to go and get it yourself,
Pensions are in the millions.
yeah, by the time you're done, you work your 20 years. Very hard to get fired. My dad, did 20 years in the Air Force, 20 years in the government after that, and he's a hard worker. He's a guy who's rises to the top and ends up leading people wherever he goes. And it's like, he's talked so many times about how, like, Eric, you've led organizations now where one of the ways that you've improved organizations is by firing people.
Big time.
You may not do that in the government.
No.
You're not so it's the perfect ideal, platonic ideal of a job for this kind of risk-averse safetyism mindset. And we're saying safety third.
Well, yeah, and the other thing that I would say is when you think about the church, part of this is when all your people are trained as men and leaders by the bureaucracy, corporate or government, one of the problems you tend to find is that then your elders become these risk-averse bureaucrats, right? You're actually safer if you just kick things up the chain or you pass the buck to somebody else. And so I think that one of the things when we're talking about wealth, we're also talking about the kind of men that we're going to raise in a community. Because I can tell you as a small business owner, when you have 15 people, 20 people, 30 people whose lives and families depend on you getting things together and things have to work and your products have to be delivered on time and your services do as well, there's a weight of responsibility. You become a different kind of man.
Yeah.
Always think about, there's a line in the Aeneid where he says, down deep they harden fast. Meaning when you're deep in the fires of hell, going through trials, men harden.
Yeah.
And so in all of this, we're really talking, wealth is about the men who build it, right? And what they build it for.
Yep.
And if I think you do it right and you train your men right to be wealth builders, that's one of the ways you're going to get hard men.
That's right. I think we need to make a T-shirt that's just an Eric Kahn profile picture, like a portrait and profile that just says, it's like in the Aeneid.
Yes.
As the caption.
Yeah, I think so.
So we'll get our designers on that.
So just finishing up this thing that I keep getting interrupted in,
Sorry.
Gloriously, thank you for that.
Is that like your life?
But yeah, the thing is,
role?
It's happening right now.
Would you stop interrupting me while I am interrupting you?
The idea of just like keeping your head down, taking the safe job, taking the corporate job or the government job or whatever, is that functionally what you're doing, if you do work, is that you are building the house of pagans by playing it safe.
You're building somebody else's house.
You're building somebody else's house. You end up being a slave to a pagan lord who is building wealth on your back.
But it's a lot easier.
It is a heck of a lot easier to do that. There's no risk, right?
Brian, we were talking about this the other day with one of our friends, Trent, but we were talking about how when you start a business, for example, like the energy units, right?
Yes.
It's astronomical how much energy it takes. So really, that's the other thing that like we're calling men to is, we have to do that. If we're going to build parallel economy outside of this, working for the pagan masters.
Yep.
Christendom Bible College offers a one-year certificate in the humanities for students who intend to pursue a degree or for students who prefer to begin their chosen occupations upon completion of our program. Older students who never attended college or who went to a college where the humanities were less robust will also find our program stimulating and suitable. Located steps from the Ohio River in the town of New Richmond, we're unaccredited in order to remain free to teach as our biblically minded consciences demand. As servants of Christ, we won't wear the yoke of the woke. Instead, we stand on the shoulders of Christianity's giants, not to stew in nostalgia, but to see through the culture war's fog to the glorious days of a Christendom still to be built. Our exceptional faculty are committed to the historic, biblical foundations of our faith. Come be a part of Christendom Bible College. Visit us on the web at christendombiblecollege.org to learn more. While there, be sure to sign up for our email updates and receive your free 3-chapter excerpt of our very own Dr. Frank J. Smith's new book, Race, Church, and Society.
I think it is important though, because, and we'll talk about this later, is what are you using wealth for? Or what are you working for? It's a really important thing. So Andrew Isker in our interview, he said something that I thought was really good. If you work for a corporate job, you work for a pagan, you're making really good money at a government contractor. It doesn't mean you're sinning. necessarily.
No, that's not what we're saying.
I mean, you just have to be honest. Like, okay, what I'm doing here is I am plundering Egypt.
Yes.
Like, I'm taking money. They're giving me a salary, and I'm going to turn it into building the kingdom.
Yeah, and that's the point when Jesus tells the parable. I think I'm speaking off the cuff here, so I might be off in my details, but I think when Jesus tells the parable of the dishonest manager, he talks about how you can use basically like filthy lucre, like mammon, like money, this kind of like wealth that has been, it's dirty. It's gone through and actually that's all wealth, by the way. It's all touched by sin somewhere.
Corruption somewhere.
And and they use it for the kingdom of God, like, right? Jesus is kind of lamenting in this parable that the sons of this age, he's talking about like these pagans, these absolute sinners, are so cunning. Like, they can turn a profit on literally anything. This dishonest manager, he's getting fired, and so he starts writing off debts for all of the millionaires that owe his master money, so that he'll be like
somebody will take
the big
him
chungus in the court wherever he goes.
He doesn't want to dig ditches. He doesn't want to dig ditches.
They're like, he's like, I'm too old. I'm a weakling. I can't dig ditches. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to ingratiate myself with every millionaire in town. And yeah, he becomes the big chungus of the court. Like,
I'm just surprised you got the big chungus.
That was for Ben.
That was
for Ben Garrett.
Well, no, so Proverbs 12,
Tom Pombadil.
you had read Proverbs 10. I'm trying to class this up. You make it so hard.
The big chungus.
The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful will be put to forced labor.
Yeah, that's in the Bible, guys. Like, God said that.
Be diligent.
I just wanted to tie it into your dishonest manager thing, because he's like, wait a minute. I don't want to dig ditches.
Yeah.
I don't want my hand to be put to forced labor. So he was diligent. And granted, like...
And that was the point, though, is that Jesus was saying, like, how much more should the sons of light, should Christians, be cunning and righteous? Like, not to be... I'm not saying go start a confidence game in like a mafia in your local area and be like, they told the King's Hall, they told us that we should just go get rich by whatever means necessary. Yeah. So I started selling insurance to people and threatening to burn their businesses down if they didn't pay me. So, I mean, it worked. I'm very wealthy now. No, you need to understand what wealth is for. Another proverb that I think is very important. You've already mentioned this principle, Proverbs 21:17, whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. Like, these dudes that Eric's talking about, that are like, a lot of them, some of them inherit their money from family, whatever. But a lot of these guys who start businesses and, they end up with $100 million in their 40s because of their wise management and cunning stewardship. It's like they're driving trucks that look like Pastor Dan's truck, and that's not a compliment. It's not a nice vehicle.
No, it's not. It's not. I've had to take the engine apart several times,
right? Like, they don't stoop as low as to drive the Toyota Sienna that I had my wife driving for a while. To be fair, it looked better when we started using it. It was us.
So I want to transition a little bit. So we've kind of tangentially discussed this idea of like, well, Christians should be going out and taking dominion and starting businesses and taking risks. And we're going to talk more about that practically, how to start, how to take the first step in a little bit. But I've heard this criticism. So I said, if you're playing it safe, you're working in the corporate world and you're just trying to keep your head down just so that you can get home, watch Netflix, buy a nice car, go on a nice vacation, just so that you can retire and live, just die, in Florida on the beaches. Don't waste your life, John Piper. Anyway, so I've heard some people say that there is no such thing as a Christian business, because I've said there's pagan businesses.
Yeah.
I'm also saying there are Christian businesses.
Right.
And there are some people that just like, no, that's actually not a thing. There is no such thing as a Christian business. Have you ever heard this?
Oh, man, people say this about
R2K stuff.
Yeah, it's like there's no such thing as a Christian nation. There's no such thing as a Christian business. And they're like, because a Christian is a regenerate human being. I'm like, listen, guys, you can use the word Christian as an adjective. Like, you can do that. Like, we do that. There's such thing as Christian ethics and non-Christian ethics. There is such thing as a Christian business, and we're not saying that the business is a regenerate human being. We're using the word like a normal word. I get so annoyed by this criticism.
So the business is regenerate?
It's such a midwit take where they're just like, I'm so smart. I have 110 IQ. there's no, technically a Christian is a regenerate human being, and I'm technically correct, which is the best kind of correct. So therefore, you're an idiot. Checkmate, Theo, bro. And I'm like, you know what? You're such an idiot. Christian can be used as an adjective. Like, it makes me.
Nobody says that like, oh,
going.
that sacrifice was demonic.
Oh, I'm
like,
sorry.
no, it's not demonic. It was just a sacrifice.
Demons are ancient, maleficent, undying spiritual beings, fallen angels. They're not sacrifices. Therefore, it can't be a demonic sacrifice.
Nobody does that.
I just want to.
It's like toast.
I'm trying not
French
to.
Toast. No, they're not.
There's no such thing as French. Toast is toast. Toast is bread that's been baked.
French.
Again,
actually, when my toast is
morals
burned,
can't be Christian.
I just call it French Canadian toast. Is this guy French Canadian or Chippewa?
Oh yes, yes.
Because you guys are always
more
burning
jokes.
burning
More
me.
jokes.
Okay, what we're talking about here is
Not
one
the
of the
French
reasons.
Canadians.
I'm going to tie this in so beautifully. If you guys are ready for this segue, it's going to be like a perfectly cut dovetail joint by Brandon Dyer, Dovetail Carpenter King of Maine, whatever his name is. Literally gave him that name, so I should know. This is my segue. This is one of the reasons why Christians are so good at getting conquered. Is because they're like, business, that's not a part of the kingdom. That's out there in the common kingdom. Like, just go do whatever. That's like natural law. Don't bring the Bible into this stuff. Like, it doesn't really matter to the advance of the Christian mission. The Great Commission has nothing to do with wealth, money, and space. That's just Noahic covenant stuff. Go do your thing. And this is quite frankly one of the reasons that Christians of late have been so adept. Like, our spiritual gift, if we took the spiritual gift test, it would say you have the spiritual gift of being conquered by pagans.
Oh,
That's your spiritual gift.
Yeah, I think it only works when you're living in the lap of luxury.
Exactly.
And ease and pleasure. So, like, at some point, and we're starting to see this, like, through the last couple of years, look, people were pushed up against a wall, and it's like you had to make choices. And I think the best way out of this is honestly just to read the Bible like a blue-collar Christian. And what I mean by that is I feel like intellectuals all the time are outsmarting themselves.
Yeah.
Like, of course you can be a Christian business. You can run it on Christian principles and be faithful to God in your business. And
well, I'm a Christian, and I only hire Christians, and we operate Christianly.
yeah, exactly.
And we use our money to do Christian stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a Christian business.
I think just in a blue-collar way, you can be like, look, at face value, we can obviously do that.
Yeah.
And like Brian said, sometimes the best thing we can do is just sneer at people and say, you're an idiot. Of course you can do that.
That's usually,
and then we ignore them, and then we build our business.
and then we just say, oh, that's anyway, and then we just keep building our Christian business.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Christians are wildly good at getting conquered. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Like, when we're thinking about, like, what is the kind of economic thinking that gets you conquered?
Well, yeah, if you don't explicitly have the Missio Dei in mind when you're doing a business, let's say you are a business owner, and you're like, yeah, there is no such thing as a Christian business. And so I'm just going to kind of operate based on my, my MBA and whatever podcast you listen to that's on business. And so you recruit like you would in some pagan industry, and you have a certain mission statement that is fairly pagan. I mean, you are being conquered. The walls are down. The pagans are in the building, and they're running the ship. You have just had mutiny orchestrated by yourself.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is that you will lose the business. You have no control then over the virtue of the business and what it's trying to accomplish.
Two examples.
Yeah.
Two examples of this. One of them, again, from a recent conversation with King's Hall listener, who is a very successful businessman, and from a family of success. So this is kind of in his blood. And he was talking about a I think it was a telecommunications company that was medium-sized company in this world, but to us, huge, like $250 million company, right? That was Christian. Basically, they were Christians. They had Bible verses on the wall. You walk in and you knew that you were in a space where Christians were in charge. And the owners sold the company to Samsung. And the question that was asked of these Christians who made a ton of money was, what are they going to do with the walls? Like, you made a bunch of money, great. Like, and I'm sure you can do great things with that money, not disparaging that, but the thing you built that was producing and could continue to produce income and employ people and make a difference in the lives of many other Christians, you just sold to pagans. Another example, and I'm not going to name names on any of these, but a guy that built a business and like a very successful business. These are real examples, by the way. We're not making these up. And hired a bunch of people in the community to work at the business. You know, Christian men who were like, yes, finally we get to work for this company that's a Christian company doing good work. And they weren't a Christian company because they were selling Jesus junk, because they were selling like
Sunday school
testaments,
rewards,
you know, and like, you know, little mints with verses on them and stuff.
Testaments.
No,
those are great.
They were just providing, and this is what the economy is made out of, people. It's made out of human needs. It's the love of neighbor applied to providing your neighbor with things they need and want that will improve their lives in an exchange that's mutually beneficial. That's the economy. It's just the first, you know, the greatest commandments applied vocationally. So built this business, tons of men working there in the community, whole community kind of, you know, buoyed up by it. Obviously, the church is being benefited because here's these godly men with good jobs that are providing for their families and giving to the church and schools, and all this stuff's happening. And then, you know, the leadership of that company decided to sell it. Again, decided to sell the company to pagans. You know, it made a ton of money. And then everything seems okay. Like, hey, this is a good sale. They're not going to like fire all the Christians or anything. Yeah, but then COVID happens. And guess what the big company that bought them did? If you don't get the vax, you're in trouble, right? So all of a sudden, in an event that could not easily have been just foreseen, you got to believe that. I think the people who sold this business, I have in mind, regret that they did this, because that's an example of Christians getting conquered, where you had this great thing that you had built with your blood, sweat, and tears.
Could have passed it on.
And could have passed it on, could have continued to expand. And look, I haven't built a business worth, you know, tens of millions of dollars. So I'm not claiming to know all the temptations or even all of the ins and outs of all these decisions. But when Christians think this time, these short-term 5 years instead of 500-year kind of things, as you know, Dan wrote in our notes, that's one way that I think Christians, that the type of men who will hear this episode, and maybe some of you will build businesses like that, fully expect that to be the case. But you got to be careful that you don't fumble the ball on the 1 yard line, right? Don't fumble the ball on the 1 yard line. Convert, and that means through the generations.
Yeah, that's really good. So, I mean, we can move on from Christian businesses to Christian families. So Christian families are really good at getting conquered as well. We've talked about public schooling before. Like, you want to get conquered, just send your generations to the pagans to be discipled as a pagan. Yeah. And surprise, they're pagans now, and you've lost your generations. But another thing that people do is that they spend their inheritance that is for the generations, not for them, not supposed to be for themselves, but they spend the inheritance of their grandchildren on themselves in some sort of retirement.
Yep.
Or nursing home.
Or in a nursing home. Yeah, those are the two areas. So you retire and you do your dream. You do the RV across the country thing. Yeah. And, I mean, people are free to do these things. It really, again, it's a principle. It's a principle that needs to be applied.
It's the way you do it. Yeah.
It's the way you do it. Yeah, what are you doing this for? So this inheritance for your generations are completely squandered on your RV trip across the U.S. or your river boat tours in Europe or whatever the heck it is. Get crazy. Yeah. It ends up being spent there, and then when you get too old to do that, then you get put into a home because you don't want to inconvenience your kids, or maybe your kids are unwilling to take you in, and then the nursing home will bleed you absolutely dry.
Yeah, $20,000 a month until you have no money.
Can I play Boomer's Advocate here?
Yeah,
I want to hear Boomer's Advocate.
I earned that money, and I worked harder than you stupid millennial. Because I've actually heard this.
Then I would say I don't want your damn money. I'll build my own kingdom.
Yeah,
the generations start with me. You will be forgotten.
But it is interesting. I mean, it really gets into this issue of, well, part of it is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's just selfishness. I exist for me and my pleasure.
Well, yeah, it is selfishness. It's also no instruction.
Yeah.
And how should you think?
Yeah, it's weird because so the first time, I had never heard about inheritance in the church in, I don't know, like 15 years, like seminary, we didn't talk about that. The first time I had ever read about it was in a Joel Salatin book. And I remember asking a friend about that. I was like, do you think inheritance, like, do parents owe their kids inheritance? Like, is that important? Is that a good thing? And he had me start reading. I think I was reading some stuff from. He just died actually, but like Marshall Foster on generational thinking. Foster was talking about like, 500-year plans. He was talking about things like, and I think he's influenced Doug Wilson, if I'm not mistaken. How can you start thinking in terms of, okay, when Abraham was given the promise to Moses, you're 400 years, somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah, before his descendants were going to set foot in the land and start conquering it.
Right.
400 years.
So you're talking about like that, well, how many generations is that?
10.
10 generations total. Yeah, I mean, that's not something you're going to see
It's
in
a lot.
your own lifetime.
Yeah.
So I think it's that too, getting people to think like this.
Yeah, it's as far away as my family immigrating to North America from France.
Me buying a $300,000 RV,
Canada,
and going around the country.
well,
is
North
like,
America. Okay, that's fair. That's
Canada
fair.
to be
the French,
now.
the
Yeah.
French ladies.
Did you go to public
of the king
school?
That what?
Did you go to public school?
Of course, I went to public school.
Okay, yeah, Canada is in
everybody
North
knows Dan went to public
Canada.
school.
I don't. Let me
Everybody here
mansplain
is-
this to you. Canada is
Yeah.
in North America.
Yeah, I know it's in. Yeah. I just wanted to.
Just
yeah,
because you
you're
just
right,
wanted to
you're
call
right.
my ancestors prostitutes.
Prostitutes
again.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
I like the fact that I got interrupted by
Bifcli-
Dan.
yeah, now
Dubois.
we interrupted you, Eric.
I got interrupted by Dan, who's always
in the interrupter.
they interrupted me.
Now he's the interruptee.
now
That's
he's
fair.
interrupting.
That's fair. I will take
That's
that
fair.
criticism.
No, you're the interruptee. He's the interrupter. Okay,
Yeah.
keep going.
Let's settle this in the parking lot.
I
I'll
don't
see
want to
you
fight. I said
in
I
the
would
parking
accept
lot.
that responsibility and that accusation.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Dan
I
just
owe
took
it.
responsibility.
I own it.
Dang it. So
Really cuts the
Dan,
feet out of
we
under
were
you.
talking about RVs, new cars.
Really crappy patio
Well,
homes.
you know what? In defense of boomers,
Yeah.
when you've been taught wrong theology, it will lead to wrongopraxis. Like you will not practice rightly. And then when you're taught wrongly, it's highly likely that your children will be discipled since they were discipled by you. They will also be thinking wrongly. And so they will not be the type of people that are also thinking rightly about wealth, money, space. So you're like, why would I give them an inheritance of productive assets? They don't know what to do. It'd be like the dog that caught the fire truck. He's like, what do I do with it? So yeah, it gets amplified through the generations if you don't think rightly about this.
I want to ask a pastoral question. You guys are my pastors. Did you know that?
I am
did.
aware you
Okay.
are a member of the church and I am your pastor.
Every day
Okay,
I get
thank
up,
you.
I say in the mirror, you are Eric Kahn's pastor. Today is the day to be a hard man. You got to be a hard man,
That's actually terrifying. I love it.
or he will not respect you. So then I say,
I'm going to record
I say-
myself doing that in the morning.
I say, you will eat the meats. You will lift the weights. You will parent your children. You will take dominion today.
you won't eat the bugs. You won't live in the pod.
It's how I hype myself up. You will live in a spacious Rambler-style house with 4,000 square feet and a garden growing in your backyard.
You will have a wife that wears a dress. You will impregnate her. You will.
You will get the ducks from the park. I have 400 ducks.
They don't want you to know that
They don't want you to know.
Dude, if I let my ducks go, I will have 400 ducks. Did I tell you guys? I sold almost 40 ducks last year just from babies.
Dan is the meme. He's been stealing ducks from the park for years.
Okay, I didn't know that was a thing, by the way. So in 2012,
Yeah.
I emailed Weber County Park System.
Yeah.
Because I was walking through the parks and I'm like, there's so many dang domestic ducks in here.
Yeah.
Can I take the ducks?
You asked? You
I
gotta
have
ask forgiveness, not permission.
I have the email.
What did
yeah,
they
I
say?
should have just taken
Did they
it.
say, sir, of course you may not capture
They never
the duck."
replied.
Which means
They
yes.
thought you were trolling them. That's as far as I'm concerned, that's permission.
I mean, that was 10 years ago. What were we talking about?
I have
Yeah.
no idea.
So I was going to ask a.
Oh,
a
pastoral.
pastoral question. Yeah. Can you go ahead and
Oh
ask?
yes.
Hey, Eric.
That was rich though.
Eric, as your pastor, go ahead.
Oh yeah. That.
I'd like to hear this.
Thank you. Very
Yeah,
soothed
you've
by
got
your
it.
therapist.
I'm
voice.
gonna let me get my pastor voice out. Eric,
backhand
I
you.
want you to ask me the question.
Oh, my.
Yes. 911. I'd like to report
a murder. I'm about to murder a guy. Please come quickly.
No, but in all seriousness, one of the questions that I've had guys ask me a lot, because I see this a lot happening. Not so much boomers who are like, "Hey, how do I get my kids to buy into this multi-generational view?" But what I've heard a lot of is guys in younger generations saying, "Hey, I really want this," but then I go talk to my, boomer parents, and they're like, "Screw you guys!
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
I'm just going to go to the golf course."
Right.
How do
What
you
do?
counsel that guy? Because part of it is like, well, we can't kidnap our parents, and
No,
if you're in that situation,
we've had this conversation with so many families in the church, young men, young families. Like, what do I do with my parents who just they're Christians, but and they are Christians. They're members in churches. They're but they are classically discipled in the boomerism. So what do I do? And what I tell them, like, relentlessly, is you need to remember what your duties are to your parents. They're responsible for their duties to you. If they fail in those duties, you don't respond as their inferior, because you are. We're Presbyterians. Like, we believe in superior inferior relationships, where in a genuine sense, in a hierarchical sense, my parents, my in-laws, are in a position of superiority to me, where honor is due in one direction in a way it's not due in the other direction. They have their own commands, but I have this command to honor them. And so I don't honor my parents by becoming really rude to them and theologically know-it-all to them, and like, well, you guys are just boomer, okay, boomer, like just being absolutely sinful and disrespectful to them, even when they're wrong. And I'm not talking about like if they're like, there are really terrible parents that you should not trust, and there's valid times to cut off parents even, and that can, to protect your own children and things like that. But I'm just talking about these run-of-the-mill disagreements where they don't see it. You honor them, and you do what Dan said. You said, okay, and you say this in your heart and your soul and your family, and you get this right. We're going to take ground on this issue that my parents never did, because they weren't discipled to think rightly about this. They're not thinking rightly about this. But as for me and my children, I'm going to tell them, son, daughter, mom and dad are working for your children's inheritance, right? Not for you to depend on, for your children to receive, right? And so you need to get to work on their children's inheritance. Like, I just think you take the ball and you take the handoff in the generation, and you keep going, and you honor them. You don't publicly disparage them. You don't try to wear them down or like belittle them. I think you don't. A lot of the time, this looks like not forcing every conversation to just kind of like be about how you think they're wrong about everything. That's just a really good way of dishonoring your parents and ending up with a really terrible relationship that is your fault.
Yeah, you're sinning.
You're actually just sinning. And God says, do you want to live long in the land? Honor your father and mother. He doesn't say, do you want to live long in the land? If your parents get everything right, honor them. Well, like, what parents would end up getting honor? You certainly wouldn't.
yeah,
Like, we want our children to honor us, even though hopefully standing on our shoulders, they'll see farther than we did. Like, I fully expect my children and Dan's children and your children to take ground that we never even thought about. And they're like, well, this is the obvious next thing to do. And we're
Yeah, it
like,
wasn't even
wow,
possible.
That's
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah.
I would have never done that, and probably couldn't have, but they will, Lord willing. So I think it's pretty simple. You honor your father and mother.
that's good.
Yeah, I think that really ties into the conclusion where, like, what do you do? Because honoring your father and mother is actually a really good place to start.
Huge.
I know we've talked about it in the past, but one of the best ways is to recognize, even with the faults of your father and mother and the sins that they had committed and their shortcomings, is that you are who you are because of them.
Yeah.
And so any blessings that you have are usually because of your parents and your upbringing. And so it's best to dwell on those things rather than their shortcomings. And why hasn't my father given me, $1 million worth of rental properties in order to manage, and you can start lamenting that. And it ends up actually being really effeminate and gay because you're not taking responsibility. You just wish that something had happened. And so what are the things that you need to do? Honor your father and mother. Well, in order to do that, you need to be a self-controlled man. You need to have self-control. A self-controlled man is not a man that makes excuses.
Yeah.
A self-controlled man is not one that blames other men or other people for their problems. So what is a self-controlled man? I think it helps to just, by the way, identify, like, what is a man? Maybe that would be helpful.
What is a man?
What is a man? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is a tough one today.
What is a man?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Don't ask your
I'm
public
not
school
a
teacher.
biologist.
Yeah, I think.
I'm not 100% sure.
Actually, let's edit that out. Let's edit that question out. I don't know if we have an answer.
Uh-oh.
Oh, boy.
What is a man? No, you're right. You do need to start with it. We're thinking about this in terms of, as is often helpful, these expanding spheres where you're an individual man or woman. Okay, you have duties before God in that vocation. As a man or a woman, then you're maybe a father or a mother or husband, a wife. Okay, that's another. You're this person nestled in this bigger sphere, being a father, mother, husband, wife. Then you're nestled in this other sphere, being a churchman, churchwoman, where you are, one of God's covenant people, participating in a local church and good membership. And then you go out and you have duties as a citizen. You kind of go out in these spheres, and you can begin to understand, I think, and get your assignment, discover your job description that God gives you, rather than inventing it yourself in each of those spheres, can honestly just be really helpful.
I think there's two levels or stratums to this thing, right? Where on the one hand we have all the general principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Men are supposed to provide and protect. Genesis 2:15, we're made in the image of God. Man comes from the root word for veer, courage. Men are supposed to be courageous. So like you start with these general principles, and then I think, Brian, a lot of what you're saying, then you go out in the real world, and you figure out, okay, I got to be those things, but if you're Eric, it might be that you're a writer. Mm-hmm. If you're Dan, it might be that you're really good at marketing. Whatever it is, or business, or you'll find those areas where you have your niche. But I think fundamental to everything, and why self-control and discipline is so important here, is because, like, if you can't take care of your body, if you can't get to bed on time, if you can't sleep well, and keep a schedule, if you can't discipline what you put in your body, like, none of this even matters. So I would just say, as I've always said on my podcast, like, just go to the basic bedrock things. Discipline equals freedom.
Yeah.
Start with, things like a daily exercise. Start with things like caloric intake. Start with your bank account and your budgeting. Because trust me, if you can't budget your own finances, you cannot run a business unless you work for the U.S. government, and then you probably are doing pretty solid because you just get more and more.
You'll
debt.
be in charge of other people then.
Yeah, exactly.
Teaching them how not to run a business.
If you spend money poorly, you'll be in charge.
Yes.
But I would say, you have to self-control yourself in those personal economic ways.
Yes.
Yeah, the way I had written that was you need to have the basics in the basics category.
Yes.
So those are some of the basic things of like what forms a man. Another thing I would put into that category is that men are made to take dominion.
Yeah.
Those are the marching orders.
Yep.
Be fruitful, multiply, take dominion. Okay? And so in order to take dominion, what that involves, like, so if you were to walk into the barren land and the order was take dominion over this, you have to have an idea of what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? Do I walk around in circles until I've covered the whole, obviously it means more than that.
What would success look like?
Yeah, what would success look like? So I think it's really helpful to have certain principles. I've talked about it as like having a mission, vision, values. Those are like very corporate-y sort of business terms. But I think applied to the man, having principles that you would die for before capitulating are really vital to have.
Yeah.
Certain things that I exist to do this thing, and this thing, and I would die before I capitulate on any of those things. And then you would use your time, money, wealth, and place to serve those principles.
Yes. And they are, again, the principles start with the basics in a basics category. Like, God forbid you become a successful business person. It goes to your head, you cheat on your wife with the secretary and blow up and then you're a wealthy loser. Like, God forbid that you do something like that.
And you pass on generational curses instead of generational wealth.
God forbid you succeed in building this durable, anti-fragile, productive property business, whatever it is, and then you sell it out to the pagans so you can go and have some fun vacations and just shoot your legacy in the foot. Like, God forbid you don't disciple your children and you put all your time and all of your best strength into just building this wealth-producing thing, and then you fail to catechize and disciple your children and you lose them to an Absalom somewhere who's going to steal their hearts. God forbid you do those things, but once you have those kind of basics in here, getting really practical, I think, on this subject can be helpful, because a lot of guys are probably looking at this and they're like, I want to do this. I want to increase my income. I want to build productive assets. I want to do this stuff. Like, I don't know where to start. And I do think one of the most practical places where a young man can start in thinking about this is thinking in just disciplining yourself to think in two directions kind of all the time. One of them is, what did God give me? What did he put in my hands? What are those? Your assets are going to be your skills too. What am I good at? Am I good at talking? Am I good at words and communicating? Am I good at building? Am I good at doing that assessment? Maybe you're a 1 talent guy, 5 talent guy, 10 talent guy, whatever it is. Where is my where is that? And then also, in an outward-facing way, saying, what are the needs of my neighbors? What are the needs and wants of my neighbors that wouldn't be sinful, right? Because your neighbors have some wants that would be sinful to go out and provide for them. Your neighbors want to look at porn. Don't be like, oh, an economic opportunity. No. What are the non-sinful, what are the righteous needs, the normal human needs that your neighbors have, or wants and needs that would be righteous to fulfill? And then you can start to get out of this kind of like trying to discover your Enneagram number and your like spiritual gift survey will somehow magically tell you exactly what job to do. It's like, no.
Because then you're going to get the result. Your spiritual gift is being conquered.
Your spiritual gift is being conquered. It's like, no, if you instead go, well, okay, I am really good at managing people. I'm really good at it. So I might not be really good at doing some trade or something like that, but maybe I'm really good. Well, that's a great skill. So maybe I'll build a business and say, I'm going to use like the least glamorous business idea I've ever had, which is porta potty rentals. Maybe you're like, our area has a lot of construction going on all the time, a lot of development. You know what development sites need? Porta potties. So I'm going to say, what capital would I need to start a porta potty company? I'm going to train some people, manage them well, get some systems in place so that I can rent out a porta potty with less overhead than the competitor, provide better service because I'm a Christian, honor my word, just go about it Christianly. And then pretty soon, maybe you end up operating the largest porta potty rental in your city. And it sounds silly, but it's like, literally, that's something that people are going to need forever. Anywhere they're building stuff, like when you start to think this way, looking in and saying, what are the talents God's put in my hands? And then looking out and saying, what do my neighbors need or want? And can I connect the two in a way that's economically productive, loves my neighbor by benefiting them, benefits my family and hires people, builds business. And pretty soon, you look out, and instead of having a scarcity mindset, which is so much of the killer of productivity and building productive wealth, this scarcity mindset of, well, there are few jobs and a lot of people competing for them. How will I ever make a living? And instead you look and you're like, there's a lot of people around here. That people have a lot of needs and wants. I bet I could find a need or a want, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different things, multiple streams of income. Dang, I bet if I just read the Proverbs, worked hard as unto the Lord, generous with my money, honest with my customers, love the people I encounter, take a genuine interest in other humans. Like if I just do these Christian things, wow, maybe there's not a scarcity out there. Maybe there's enormous opportunity. Like the world is made out of opportunity right now is one of the things Christians need to get in their bones.
Yeah, big time.
There was one story I heard where a gold miner was asked the question, how do you find gold? And he said, gold's everywhere. You just need the eyes to see it.
Mm.
And so that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You have to have a different frame of reference in order to see that there's actually opportunities everywhere.
Yes.
And so another thing that I would like to talk about, so you said that you need to, what was your first point? You said you had 2 points.
So you look in and you say, where
am I good at?
Because people are different. And then you look out and you say, what do my neighbors need?
Okay, that's great. The other thing I would say is find a respectable man, because this so much crosses over with masculinity in wealth creation and taking dominion in wealth money space, is that you find somebody that has been successful and then put yourself in their way.
Yeah.
And just enculturate yourself with this person and think like they think and do like they do.
Yeah.
Because people who are wealthy, just like men who are especially masculine, they think differently.
Yeah.
They just do. That's something that I've discovered over the last few years, just surrounding myself with men who have been more successful in business. It's like, wow, you think about these issues way differently and these opportunities way differently than I do. And it's very, very helpful because also read. You should definitely read, which is very, very helpful. But having on the ground help from other men that have been successful and are doing this successfully is unbelievably helpful.
Yeah. I think as well, when we're talking about the power of community in pooling resources, providing, having in-group preference. Christians should be operating on in-group preference in a lot of ways.
Parallel economy type stuff.
Yeah, where we're saying, I'm building my business and I want to hire Christians. I want the money that is being brought in to stay in this place. I'm in the local church. I want to hire that person, bring them up, business partners. I know churches and groups that are of Christians who are pooling together and saying, instead of DCAing into the stock market and putting my $500 dollar cost averaging, putting my $500 a month investment into, a mutual fund ETF, S&P, individual stocks, cryptocurrency, whatever it is. Well, what if we formed REITs and real estate investment groups? And we formed, other business investment groups. And what if 50 men in your church were all putting their $500 a month or whatever it is, or $100 a month into a mutual pooled investment group, and you started elevating 2 or 3 guys that were particularly skilled and proven and gifted in managing those resources? What could you do? What might you be able to build together in terms of productive? And I'm talking about like foothold in your community and real estate, helping your church, but also just producing productive wealth creating businesses, assets. And what happens is that, we're 10 isolated men who own homes in a city are going to have very little influence on a city council and things like that when they're doubling your property taxes every 2 years like they're doing here in Utah. And but 10 businesses, that's powerful. 10 businesses or guys that own influential business interests in the community, those men, because they have an owned interest, a proven owned interest in the community in ways that it's sinful that they ignore homeowners and that sort of thing. But that actually does make a difference when you go to then try to flex the own space muscles. All of a sudden, it's a lot more difficult. Like, think about a place like Moscow, Idaho, where a lot of the biggest businesses, a lot of the biggest restaurants and things like that, some of the best businesses in the town are all from members of Christ Church. So they're just like, they're much harder to push around. It gets harder and harder to push you around. It gets easier and easier for you to exercise benevolent influence and positive influence in your place to the degree that you're successful in acquiring wealth, money, and space in that place and using it Christianly.
Yeah, and I think banding together in investment groups and things like that is great. It might be high, as far as the bar goes.
Yeah.
But what's not a high bar is if you've got a church of people that are godly and that you trust, and you say like, hey, I want to be a plumber. I want to own my own plumbing business. If I'm a plumber, will you guys be my customers?
Yeah.
Like, I need customers. Will you guys be my customers? Mm-hmm. Will you give me, like you said, in-group preference? Yep. All of a sudden, that barrier, that risk that we were talking about, taking the risk becomes a lot more realistic.
It does.
In some ways. I'm going to be the HVAC guy, or whatever trade it is, the car mechanic, whatever
we
side
need a
hustle.
Midwife. We need a really competent midwife in our church. We have a great midwife, that we all use. She's getting older. She's not, not a part of the church. I don't think she's a Christian, but it's like, you start looking at a community that's really productive.
Do you know how many babies we'll have had 2022 and into 2023 right now?
Oh, how many? It's unbelievable.
18.
So you look at that and you say, we pay on average, let's say our midwife costs on average $4,000 per birth. I think that's pretty standard in our area for an experienced
4 to 5,
midwife.
something like that.
4, 5, 6. So you go, okay, well, we've just provided 18 of those. Let's say even 12 of those end up being midwife customers for you. Well, that just gave you a base of $60,000 in income. There you go. So go find a few other people. Like, we might not be able to keep your plumbing business open single-handedly.
No.
But we might give you this huge base to help with.
But especially, one of the fears is external factors on a business. That's one of the unknowns. It's like, well, what sort of economic conditions are we going to have another business closure or whatever? But if you're in a church and you have people that you trust and you're like, no, I won't get the vaccine. No, I won't wear the mask. No, I won't do this thing that they're asking me to do. Will you hire me? They should say yes. Yes, you will have business here.
Yep.
You will have business here. And so I think that's, going along with that, the power of community, we think so individualistically. And there's so much more power, and the pagans do this.
Yeah, they do.
They're really good at it.
Yeah.
So using and leveraging the people that you have.
Look at Joe Biden's son.
Well, I was going to say,
That's in-group preference right there.
even in the ghetto culture, but like the Jews are very well known for this, like taking care of each other.
Well,
Yeah,
the
the-
Rothschilds.
You can look at
Yeah,
middleman
or-
minority groups through history.
But even like, like the Jewish culture in New York City, for example, like they take care of each other.
Yep.
That's what you do.
Yeah. Well, guys, we've come to the end of this show just simply because of time. There is more that we can say, and we'll continue to talk in our after hours show. We produce a special patron exclusive episode because our patrons really help make this show possible. And so we try to give them this added value of an extra show each week where we kind of hit stop on the main recording and we just hit record again. And we're much funnier. Like it's actually better in every way. Let me just say that. So if you think that King's Hall is great, just wait till you hear After Hours. There are different racial impersonations that Dan does. There are mainly Dan, actually only Dan. There are all kinds of.
I talk about different people groups.
Eric talks about the best tweets of the week all the time. Like he's connected, and so sign up there, help us make this show possible. And the link is in the description. We want to thank, as usual, our sponsors for this episode. Reformation Bible College Christendom Bible College and Reformation Heritage Books. I combined them into one ultra sponsor. And we're thankful to both of those sponsors. Help us out by, supporting those sponsors. Checking out the library Reformation Heritage Books has this unapologetically Christian higher education that Christendom Bible College is offering there. We've got links in the description for both of those sponsors, our Patreon, as well as other goodies there. So make sure you check that out. Share this episode with your friends. Thanks to Gab CEO Andrew Torba for sharing our last week's episode over on Gab and convincing us to get on Gab TV, which we had completely forgotten to do.
Yeah,
so
check that out.
You can check us out on Gab TV now as well. We're putting our new episodes and getting our back catalog up there on Gab TV, another place to listen by some base Christians who are building, something actually pretty massive there in a social media site used by tens of millions of people. So check that out. And thanks again for listening. As always, Winkit, Quisa Winkit, he conquers who conquers himself. Go out, be self-ruled Chad Kings. See you next time in the King's Hall.